I had Dan Tapiero here at 10T Holdings, and he said, Brian, crypto is like the steam engine. It's a piece of technology that made the whole world better. And now we have a way of cryptographically ensuring that this asset is secure or it has a specific monetary policy. Is that the way you look at these things, as a new piece of technology, and that's why the future could be this digital money? And can you explain that to most people, regulators, banking institutions, et cetera? Or is that the way you look at it?
That's one way of looking at it.
Okay.
It is technology. The value of crypto, to me, is less in the tokens than it is in the underlying blockchains, right? And basically, the token is a call on that blockchain. It's an ownership of that blockchain. The value is in the whole as opposed to the individual pieces. There's also another notion. So it is technology. It's a technology revolution in money. One of the aspects of our existing financial system, so I always say there's three shortcomings. Let me even back up further. From the dawn of human history, from the time we came out of the forests, and until about 400 years ago, there was really only one form of money, and that was fiat money. That was something where the token was the representation of value, and the way you validated a transaction was to validate the token. You know the old cartoon character taking the coin in his mouth to see whether it's wooden or whether it's metal, right? So you validate the token. You take a $10 bill, you take a 10-pound note, you hold it up to the light, you look at the different features of the instrument, you validate the token. And that system really worked great until we discovered its major shortcoming, and that is it's local. Tokenized money works locally. $10 bill works in New York, it doesn't work in Paris. The 10-pound note works in London, it won't work in Singapore. And so the problem with that system is in this age of discovery, when merchants would travel around the world, the local nature of tokenized money didn't work. So they came up with a different system, the banknote system. Dutchmen deposited the guilders in the Bank of Amsterdam. It gave them a banknote, and they go to Venice with that banknote. And suddenly now the banks aren't validating the individual. What they're doing is taking the credit of another bank. And that is 90% of the money we have in today. Whether you use a paper check, whether you use Zelle, Venmo, whether you use most of our electronic systems, it's a bank-to-bank transfer. It's banks trusting the credit. Now, they do need to establish, however, that you have an account with that bank. And so therefore the shortcomings, once we went to a banking system, is it's exclusive. You can't join the club of financial inclusion if you do not have credentialed identity. Right. And in a world of 8.5 billion people, when 1.5 billion do not have identity, are excluded from our existing financial system. The shortcomings of the fiat system was it was local. The shortcomings of our bank system is that it's exclusive. It's slow, and it's expensive, because all that identity has got to be confirmed, who you are, who your bank is, et cetera, et cetera. So if you go into a shop with a $10 note, they validate the note. If you go in with anything else, they got to validate who you are, where you bank with, and it's going to take time for all that money to move around. Here's what crypto changes. No longer is it local. It's around the world in a second. No longer is it exclusive, because you don't need identity anymore, and no longer will it be expensive and time consuming. And so it solves the four shortcomings of everything we've known so far: the local nature, the exclusivity, the slowness, and the expensiveness. Today, financial inclusion means credentialed identity. Tomorrow, it'll mean computing power. If you've got computing power, you will be able to go into the financial system of the future, provided we don't get one thing wrong. And that is that we don't overlay on the future of money the AML, KYC, the anti-money laundering, know your customer requirements that we require today. Because as important as that is as a law enforcement tool and as a control tool, it actually is the key reason why we are financially under-included. Because big portions of populations, not only in the developing world, but even in our own developed world, either do not have credentialed identity or don't wish to have credentialed identity, and therefore they're excluded and they're reduced to using fiat currency. We can open up this new financial system to much greater financial inclusion and still do AML KYC, but not using the current methodology we have today, which is identity first, financial transaction second.
Okay, this is a really important question, one that comes up all the time on the show. I've had people like Mashinsky of Celsius saying, keep the money clean, KYC, AML, the institutions are come. Stani Kulichev of Aave saying, show the liquidity, the institutions will come, and don't make them prove the KYC. You've just talked about this world, this future world. Well, we don't want to overlay this old school KYC, AML, protocols on the future. You're saying it couldn't be computing power instead. What, I don't understand. What does that future look like?
All right. So I explained to you how we went from fiat money to banknote money. Okay. Long before AML KYC came around, that banknote system required someone to verify that they have a bank account. So you show identity, right? Yeah. And then the bank, you have sufficient funds and transfer the funds. So the first step in that transaction was identity first. Along in the 20th century comes AML KYC, and they basically adopt that methodology to do anti-money laundering. ID, we're going to get people's ID first, right? Because that's already what was in the underlying architecture, so they just layered it on. Okay. But what's happened today is, because we've so come accustomed to that methodology of AML KYC, we confuse the current methodology with the policy. The policy of anti-money laundering was good policy, but there's many methodologies of getting there. It doesn't always have to be identity first. If I want to buy a $10 sandwich, why does the system need to validate who I am? It doesn't with cash. Why should it have to do it with a financial transaction, right? In fact, look at other forms of law enforcement that we use every day. We don't get identity first. Look at highway safety. Before getting on the highway, in fact, before freely getting on the freeway, you don't have to stop at a toll and say, here's my name, here's where I live, here's where I bank, here's my social security number, your ID number. No, you freely get on the highway, and law enforcement uses pattern recognition. Right. If you're speeding, if you're reckless driving, to identify the possibility of unlawful contact, they will then stop the activity and then get your identity. Identity not first, but identity last. The same technology that gives us blockchain will give us the ability to do an identity not first, but an identity last system. How is that? Because we use big data analysis, pattern recognition, the same technologies that Facebook and eBay are using every day to look for consumer trends. We'll look for trends of illicit conduct. And when we find them, and those technologies are very good, we'll then shut down the activity and get the identity as necessary to prosecute them. Now that may sound like a big change, but we have to be honest, Brian. Everybody knows the existing system's not very good. Right. We spend more money to run the existing system than we capture criminal activity. It's got a 96% false positive rate. We're gathering way more information on our fellow citizens and excluding a lot of citizens who would like to come into the financial system by insisting identity is a first step. Identity doesn't have to be a first step. We could do a better job of anti-money laundering if we didn't require identity as a first step, if regulators would go from being reactionary to go to being proactive and become quantitative regulators. I gave a speech in 2018 calling for my fellow regulators in Washington to become quantitative regulators. We need to adopt the same technology that's being used in commercial avenues to do law enforcement online without invading people's privacy, because they may be entirely innocent. Unless the pattern shows a probable cause of illicit activity, government shouldn't have your identity as a first step in every transaction, unless government's objective is more than anti-money laundering and it's to actually surveil people's economic activity.